Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out a zero trust architecture. With me on today's show are Donna Bennett, Chief Information Security Officer, Department of State; Vu Nguyen, Acting Chief Information Security Officer, Department of Justice; Rob Thorne, Chief Information Security Officer, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Department of Homeland Security; Eric Sanders, Chief Information Security Officer, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Department of Homeland Security; Felipe Fernandez, Senior Director, Systems Engineering, Fortinet Federal; John Davis, Vice President, Public Sector, Palo Alto Networks; and Mark Sinkovich, Federal Director at Lumio. Well, we had SolarWinds back in December of 2020 when it was publicly announced. May 12th, Executive Order 14028, improving the national cybersecurity. January 2022 of this year, U.S. government focused towards zero trust cybersecurity principles. A lot of help, a lot of oversight, a lot of direction. But the reality is you all have been at this for several years. Donna, you've been over at Department of State for, I think, about a year now. Tell us about the state of the state as to where you are on your zero trust journey.
Well, as you know, thank you, Luke, for inviting me
see you.
To discuss. I know it's been a while since we have spoken, but at the State Department, we have embarked on zero trust way before zero trust was a common name that came out. As most people are aware, zero trust really honed in on the principles, the basic cybersecurity principles that we were supposed to implement along the way, especially starting back with the OPM breach. And we had already embarked on our identity management, implementing multi-factor authentication, and really honing in on our assets on the network, identifying what's on the network and who's on the network through continuing diagnostic mitigation. And so zero trust was really putting all those pieces together that were in a multifaceted way of all these various implementation. And so it's a way to bring those pieces together so that we can make sure that we have our our eyes focused on the implementation. So it has been a challenge in some of the areas, really looking at some of these applications because we've implemented it the way that, initially it was at the network layer. And so now we're honing in on those various applications, really taking a look at our high value assets and starting from the high value assets down to the rest of our applications on the network.
Yeah, the reality is it's a journey, right? I mean, you're on a journey here. Vu, how about over at Department of Justice? You've been over there for a while. There's a lot of activity going on over there. You're on the same journey as far as laying down this architecture and snapping everything into it. Tell us what's happening over at Department of Justice.
Good afternoon, Luke. So prior to the presidential executive order 14028, we started the evaluation of zero trust product almost 2 years ago to align with the department IT strategic plan. So because of that research, we were able to quickly begin moving towards a zero trust architecture when the EO came out. And the DOJ zero trust capability, we were focused on 3 areas. We were focused on endpoint protections, which currently the department we deployed over 70,000 endpoint agents, EDR agents across the enterprise. And we're also focusing on building a department identity provider where we have stood up a unified identity provider, which integrate with the zero trust broker. And it's currently it's in the process of migrating from their commercial cloud to the gov cloud. And lastly is the zero trust broker itself. So currently all of our 40 of our components are piloting the broker. And we also authorize a full ATO stack for all of our zero trust products, which is in production today.
Fantastic. And that identity management, key piece of the zero trust architecture, no doubt. Rob, you're in an operating component. It's got a wide footprint across the continental United States, across the globe, and the embassies. Tell us about the journey you're on.
Yeah, good afternoon, Luke. Like Donna, and Vu, we started our journey years ago. I mean, the reality is we moved up to the cloud, 4 years ago. And in doing that, you kind of move away from that perimeter-based, that network model. As Vu mentioned, we've implemented endpoint detection and response. I think most government agencies have done that. We're getting some great return on investment on that capability. One of the things when we talk zero trust, and I talk among my peers, one of the things I mention is when you go on your journey, you really have to look at the network and you've got to start modernizing some of your capability. I mean, the reality is when you go back to when the pandemic first hit, we had 10% of our workforce would occasionally work from home.
Mm-hmm.
We quickly went up to 100% of our workforce remotely working. So when you look at technologies like the VPN, virtual private network capabilities, we quickly found out that it was rigid and inflexible and something that we needed to move away from. So some things that we're doing right now is we're looking at right now secure service edge capabilities or SASE. So we just completed a large scale pilot. We've had some great success there. And we're continuing to move out and extend that to some additional folks within our enterprise. So reality is zero trust. You've got to look at your network. You got to move away from those perimeter defenses. Data's everywhere. But the core of zero trust is, or the heart of zero trust is protecting data. And that's what our goal is moving forward.
Yeah, when the OPM breach happened, we had these conversations about, look, they're not coming in here to see how cool our networks in here are and see how we do our firewalls. They're in here to get the data, right? And speaking of data, you've got a lot of sensitive data over there, Eric. And why don't you start, just give us 30 seconds. What is the Office of Intelligence Analysis? You're a unique entity inside Department of Homeland Security. And then tell us how you're doing on your zero trust rollout.
Luke, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here. So you're right, we are a unique part of DHS. As a Title 50 agency, part of the IC, a large part of our IT is national security system. So the original executive order didn't really apply to us, right? And a lot of executive orders and other mandates come out that apply to federal agencies that don't necessarily apply to national security systems, but that didn't stop us from planning for it, right? Like the others have stated, this isn't, well, like you stated, it's a journey, right? But we have been working towards zero trust. It's not necessarily new, but now we have the actual pillars and the goalposts that we're driving towards that might not have been there otherwise. So anyway, prior to the NSM coming out, we did start programming for it in our budget cycles so that we're able to put a real plan together, because obviously, any plan that doesn't have money behind it is not a plan, right? That's just that's a hope, not a plan. So we do have a plan now. We spent some time identifying, where are we, today, and we've made a lot of great progress, especially in the areas of like multi-factor authentication, encryption, and enterprise ICAM. Three of the areas that we've already been concentrating on, but now, we continue to move in that direction as we, move across the different levels of networks that we have. Well, not all of our networks are on the same level. So, what zero trust looks like, for each of those networks kind of varies. So that was one of the challenges, right? So where do we want to, what do we want to aim for in terms of zero trust? What does success look like on each network? Looks a little different. But, we're leveraging enterprise solutions to the largest extent possible because, that's where we'll see savings and real advancement, I think.
And no doubt leveraging and snapping, as you said, to a lot of the IC enterprise environments there as well. Felipe, we can't do this unless we have these great partners with these great capabilities to help build this out. Tell us what's happening over at Fortinet. What are you seeing across the board?
Yeah, first of all, what we're seeing is a change in the mindset of our customer, the federal government. In the past, it's been a lot of talk to the network folks and then schedule a meeting with the security folks to try to convince them that solutions and technologies should be purchased with, buy-in from both parties. And that was a difficult task. But now what we're seeing is with this mission to drive towards zero trust architecture, those parties are already in communication before our engagements, and they're in collaborating with one another to bring in solutions that not only provide transformative network modernization capabilities, but that also bring along core components to their zero trust strategies, rather. So that's something that we're helping them do. For instance, our products can not only deliver the network transformation, such as software-defined WAN capabilities, to take them to whatever product they want to, cloud, SASE, et cetera, but also bring in zero trust architecture capabilities that they need to get visibility on the users, the devices, the data flows that is on their network, so they can actually apply the zero trust principles that they've adopted.
Yeah, I think everyone quickly realizes this is way beyond just simple plumbing, right? This goes all the way up the stack and then back down again. Has to be highly orchestrated and coordinated. John, you're a big part of that over at Palo Alto Networks. Tell us what you're seeing out there.
Thanks, Luke, and hello, everyone. Looking across the public sector landscape, I think organizations are facing growing and maybe even unprecedented cyber threats. The cyberspace domain is increasingly contested and more pervasive than ever. In terms of progress, we've seen many government organizations heighten their cyber resilience to fulfill their mission in this increasingly hostile cyber environment. They've seen that traditional cybersecurity approaches are becoming less effective in preventing sophisticated and determined adversaries. The growing prevalence of supply chain attacks is a powerful example of the limitations of legacy perimeter-focused security approaches. And I agree with Felipe. We've also seen that successful organizations are changing their mindset and accepting that threats are going to come from both outside and within their networks.
And that's just a reality of the world that we're living in, right? That's the whole idea behind trust no one, assume the worst, so to speak. Mark, how about at Illumio? You are in a unique situation there where you're striped across a variety of sectors. What are you seeing in the federal sector so far in regards to progress?
Yes, good afternoon. We're seeing a lot more granularity with zero trust at Illumio when it comes to focusing on pillars, or one of the pillars that make the biggest difference. So we focus on microsegmentation, specifically host-based microsegmentation. Mm-hmm. And that's within the last year, we're seeing a lot more interest in the federal government on this particular topic. Microsegmentation, for those folks that don't understand or know that, means you ring fence or you cloak elements of your network to reduce the attack vector. And this was pointed out when John Sherman, the DoD CIO, was confirmed by the Senate recently. In his testimony, they asked him, what are some creative ideas you're going to bring to the department? And he said, principles of microsegmentation are at the top of the list. Basically, that's really important. And before you can microsegment, you have to be able to see what's happening in your network, right? So the idea is, how can you do something about an enemy that you can't see coming? So you get that eyes on target, the ability to understand your map, right? The application workload connectivity, and then be able to do something about it. So we're seeing a lot more interest, and that's certainly been called out, for example, in the OMB memo that just came out, obviously in January of this year, where they specifically talked about microsegmentation. And then they also talked about network segmentation, which is what we don't do, right? Two different types of things, right? One's based on the application and workload pillar of zero trust, which we do micro, and then the network segmentation or macro segmentations under the network pillar.
Yeah, a lot of fine-grained clarity in what these various agencies need to do, timelines associated to that. And again, the reality is all of these agencies have been on this journey for quite some time. Donna pulled the OPM breach, and I think that's where the candle really did get lit up, and a lot of focus ever since then. Certainly before then, much more now in regards to the architecture. Speaking of architecture, Rob, you talked about a couple of different things. I'm going to ask you to highlight one specific area, if you will, one program, one activity that you'd like to bring to the forefront for the listening audience.
Yeah, so I already talked a little bit about our secure service edge capability, where we're seeing a lot of, again, a value out of that capability. Another area that we're working on right now, we believe what we're doing is we're taking zero trust from a risk-based approach. So we're focusing right now on identity and access management. We feel if we get the identity piece done, we've actually reduced quite a bit of risk within our environment. So right now, what we're focused on is our customer identity and access management. We've got a lot of activity on the southern border, and we need to get those non-US citizens access to data and get it to them quickly. So we're focused on identity from a customer-facing perspective right now. A lot of different agencies have done that well, so we're trying to mimic what some of the other agencies like IRS and others have done. And then what we're doing soon after that is we've got a pilot for some internal identity and access management improvements, adaptive access, context-based access. So we're starting to line that up internally.
Right. And you've got a wide population of your user base there, let's call it, right, that you've pointed out. Interesting to think about it from that dimension. John, how about over at Palo Alto Networks? Can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight that you're working with one of the agencies?
Sure, Luke. If you look at published frameworks from organizations like NIST, DoD, MITRE, and even some of the major vendors, you can see a common set of 3 guidelines that align directly with the profile of a successful program. First, you have to validate users and verify device integrity. We've talked about that. Any access request has to be authenticated and authorized to verify identity before granting access. We've learned that identity has to be continuously monitored and validated throughout the transaction. The integrity of the device or host requesting access has to be verified, and it's got to be continuously monitored and validated for the lifetime of that transaction. In the case of applications and cloud infrastructure, the requested device, the microservice, storage, computer resource, as well as partner and third-party apps have to be validated before granting access. Then the other 2, real quickly, you have to secure the access and enforce least privileged user and device access to data and applications. And finally, you have to secure the digital transactions, prevent threats, and protect data, because like you said, that's what most of these threats are after.
So Vu, I'm going to come up to you and ask you to just highlight a program that you'd like to point out. You talked about identity management, whole bunch of pieces and parts that you're snapping in for this architecture. Tell us about a program you'd like to highlight.
So to me, there are 3 main attributes to a successful zero trust program. The first piece is the architecture itself, and like everyone's been saying, the first piece is the identity, because having a standardized identity management approach is the foundation to establishing a zero trust framework. And the second piece is the zero trust broker itself, because the broker would leverage the validation of the identity and route the access and request to an authorized applications or network. And then lastly is, of course, is the endpoint protection, because, it will automate a continuous monitoring and assist in incident response and detecting, abnormal activity within the zero trust architecture. So because with a traditional network, when a compromise happens, and intruders can leverage, its access to move lateral across applications and systems within the trusted network. But within the zero trust architecture, in an event of a compromise, it will minimize the blast radius, and it will, help us rapidly contain the incident. And so the secondly is, of course, having a zero trust strategy, because, this is very important, because before the implementation, we need clear goals and objectives to measure our success. And then lastly is stakeholders communication, because we found that it is very, very important to gain the buy-in of our components to increase collaboration efforts, within the department, so that we can shape a zero trust solution that works for the department.
Absolutely. And a nice way to lay that out as far as all those pieces and parts that have to come together. All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture. talking about the journey. And right now we're talking about specific programs. Felipe, I'd like to throw it over to you and tell us about a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to an implementation that's underway or has already been completed.
It's never complete, right? Zero
That's
trust.
right. That's right. That's the answer I always get.
That's right. So, zero trust is very much like maintaining your mental, spiritual, and physical fitness, right? That's once you attain that, you've got to keep it. So one of the agencies we're working with has been leveraging a very large network modernization effort to deploy zero trust architecture capabilities to gain access into what exactly is on the network, devices that they didn't know were there, devices that are behaving differently than what they assumed. It was one thing to have an inventory of devices that were once procured for a certain reason. And then it's another to actually see what they're doing once they're on the network. And so what we're doing is we're bringing that to the visibility of the entire organization, all the way up to the CIO level. And they're able to now make an assessment of how they want to adapt some of the technologies they have already to incorporate into decisions about access and further access to data that those devices and applications have, to making procurement decisions once they're ready and have budgeting, to also incorporate that into how the devices and how the data flows that they need to actually have are utilized on the network.
Yeah, when these agencies do this inventory, they realize they have a lot of these pieces and parts. The memo sort of laid down some clarity for them, and now they're just snapping it all in, tying it together. Donna, how about up at Department of State? Again, you all are well on your way here. Give us an example of a program that you'd like to highlight in regards to the overall architecture of zero trust architecture.
So one of the pillars that we decided to focus on, in addition to identity management, the data pillar. About 3 weeks ago, I commissioned a program with our chief data officer, and it's a cyber data campaign, really honing in on identifying the proper nomenclature for the data, because in IT, we have so much data that's coming in. And so we have to have a way to actually normalize the data so that these products and tools that we have can actually do the analysis on the data, look at the behavioral patterns. And so I've been working really closely with the CDO to do that across the board at State Department, because as you know, one of the critical pillars in zero trust, when you have the adversary, they're not coming in, as you said, to just, peek around. They're coming in to look at your data. And especially at the State Department, we have so many different data sets that the adversary is just interested in because it's so rich in data. And we're working on national security strategies, the whole gamut. So we decided to really hone in on, how to really protect the data, but really normalize the data so that it can be protected.
Yeah, I know. The reality is every one of these agencies is a gold mine, plethora of data that any bad actor would love to get their hands on and exploit it. Mark, how about over to Lumio? Can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight?
Sure. We've been working for about 1.5 years at Lumio with the Department of the Air Force and what they're calling CNAP, which is the Cloud Native Access Point, and that's their zero trust security stack. Interestingly enough, I know a few folks on the call are talking about ICAM, and that's important. And certainly that's one of the pillars of zero trust. But what we're finding working with the Air Force is that before they're implementing ICAM, it's actually more important, as maybe even Felipe said, to get the visibility first, right? I think Felipe at Fortinet is coming at it from the network security focus on visibility. What we're doing at Lumio and with the Air Force is coming at it with visibility on the applications and workloads, so on the back end of the network, right? This is the area that most users don't see, right? Most people will log into a network, user to application, and then on the back end, all these things are happening that folks don't really know are going on, but is an attack vector. So what we're doing with the Air Force is we're giving that visibility. They're calling network discovery, right? And then we're starting to roll out microsegmentation with them. And interestingly enough, one of the Space Force customers, when we put Lumio onto the network, within 10 minutes, they were able to say, unauthorized connections on a classified network that they didn't know that were there. They were able to shut those down, right, by turning some ports off. And then the ones that they needed to leave on, they were able to micro segment. And then what we do is we create labels, and then IP addresses follow the labels. Traditionally, you have to keep track of the IP addresses, but those change on a regular basis. And the time that you try to keep track of that is also an attack vector for sophisticated attackers. So what we do is we have these labels where the IP address follows the labels, and then working with companies, in this case for the Air Force, it's AppGate, and they're actually then can reference our labels and not the IP addresses. So what they do is they dynamically adjust entitlements. So right away, we have the inside out, outside in, and now we've actually locked down the attack vector to prevent north, south, and east, west lateral movement. The long story short in that is the Air Force is getting much faster results by going through this approach and starting with visibility from the application and workload perspective, doing the micro-segmentation, and then starting to do the network security stack.
Yeah, and no doubt, every one of these CISOs, as soon as they started to put heavy instrumentation in their environment, way back in their careers, and those environments start to light up like a Christmas tree, they've been on that treadmill ever since, trying to pull it all together. Eric, why don't you give us an example of a specific entity, specific area you'd like to bring to our attention in regards to the overall progress of your zero trust architecture implementation?
Yeah, thanks. So like Rob, we're very focused right now on enterprise identity and access management, but kind of also like Donna, we're also working on data, right, and making sure that we're tagging our data and we're tagging it at the right level, that we can really more granularly define the attributes necessary to control access to the right data. Luke, as you mentioned earlier, INA has a unique mission in the IC in that we're charged with sharing sensitive data, some unclassified, some classified, with state, local, tribal, territorial governments to make sure that critical information is getting to those that need it in order to protect things like critical infrastructure. So we do have a unique mission in that regard. So we also have then a large footprint of folks that we need to ensure that we're giving the right data to the right people and not sharing what we shouldn't with the wrong people. So those are our two biggest focus areas moving forward, and areas that we've been making progress against lately.
Wide user base, if you will, that you're dealing with there, and super sensitive information. So that's a very unique challenge as you're rolling out this architecture, no doubt. We like to talk about priorities, and we want to focus on that. Rob, I'm going to start with you. I know there's a lot of different pieces of this. You got all these different pillars or snapping these different things together. Tell us what your priorities are for this year. At the end of this year, sort of what do you want to have screwed down?
Luke, I smile when you say, what are your priorities? I mean, we've got a laundry list of things that we're doing, but just a few of those from a security perspective. So one of the things we're doing is we're continuing to focus on our event log collection. You had Memo 2131, which was released in August of last year. What we're doing is, looking at it closely to say, hey, what are we going to do with this influx of logs? How do we make sense of it all? You say light up like a Christmas tree. We've implemented a lot of capabilities and tools, so we're getting a lot of alerts. One of my big concerns is burnout with my, SOC analysts and what they need to really hone in on. So we're really focused on reducing those alerts, tuning some of the capabilities, and expanding, the collection of our event logs. A couple other things: automation. We're going to continue work to mature our SOAR capability, security orchestration, automation, and response. AI. Artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning. Right now, we've got a pilot that we just started last week where we're looking at our event log data and what we can glean from that using machine learning. And then finally, we've already talked about it, but the big push for us is going to be in identity. And then also looking at our data flows and behavior of access to applications so we can better support our operations.
Right, that broad challenge of finding the needle in a stack of needles and doing it at machine speed. Automation, only way to sort of solve that problem. And speaking of automation and tool sets, et cetera, Felipe, let me go over to you. Felipe, in regards to just highlighting what you're seeing as far as priorities that are coming in from the agencies.
Yep, certainly. So, the next step after visibility is to implement the Zero Trust Network Access capability. It's the core capability, I think, and maybe the major change in terms of how technically Zero Trust is applied from the architecture and the strategies that are derived. So what we're seeing now is after we've delivered some visibility to devices and applications and data flows, Zero Trust Network Access specifically is being implemented for any users or devices in which that is feasibly possible. And also incorporating additional intelligence gleaned from continuous diagnostics and mitigation systems such as EDRs to apply that visibility, that analysis as to what's actually the end state of those devices and users into the access decision dynamically and in real time.
A lot of focus there, a lot of different moving parts. Donna, you're on a tear over there. A lot of different activities. What are your priorities for this year that you're trying to get pinned down?
So thank you for asking. So one of the main priorities that we're really trying to pin down is our identity access management, really taking a look at our MFA and how we have it deployed.
Shields up, right?
So here you go. 2209 talks about phishing resistant MFA, right? So we all have to go back, take a look at, do we have phishing resistant MFA? What does that really mean for the environment? What changes to our customers will they see once we really deploy that? And then the other thing is supply chain risk management. That's a huge thing. One of the things that we always miss, when we're putting products on the network, we're really not looking at the supply chain and looking at the SBOM. And so really honing in on that and developing that a lot more. And then the other thing we're looking at is, in addition to that, is our data strategy campaign that we're working on with the chief data officer, is normalizing the data, because as we all know, as the security operations center starts to get all of these logs in, it's like, how do you start to normalize the data? How do you normalize the data the alerts that you are receiving from your EDR? What does that actually mean? And making sure that there's that consistency with the data across the board. And so that when we're briefing leadership, we can actually brief what is the impact, what is the threat to the organization. Only way we're able to do that is really normalizing the data and really looking at the threat overall, so that, when we're making these decisions, whether to, disable something on the network or to bring something on the network, that leadership actually knows what's the impact to the mission.
Love the call out with the partnership with the CDO. You mentioned MFA, just for the listening audience. That means what, and what is that?
Multi-factor authentication. So essentially something you have to and there's very different ways to actually implement that on your network. And so, when we went back and looked at the various ways to authenticate, it actually stemmed from an incident that we had that kind of rushed us towards MFA, because we were just all PIV enabled, on our network. And so when we looked at Office 365 after one of our incidents, we were like, okay, well, we definitely have to implement that. And so now we're looking at phishing resistance and making sure that all the applications, not just at the network layer, but the applications that are also on the network, have MFA deployed within those applications too. And so I think that was like a piece that most people have, missed. They were just really looking at the network layer, but not looking at the various applications to make sure that that's integrated in there as well.
Really strengthening that identity management piece, which you all have highlighted, is so important. Mark, top priority for Illumio.
Yes, the top priority for Illumio for the coming time is to really deploy microsegmentation, help agencies and commands do that to stop adversary lateral movement, right? We've researched that about $170 billion has been spent in Zero Trust thus far, over the last several years, predominantly or most exclusively on the 3 of the 5 pillars of Zero Trust, right? ICAM, we've talked about that today, networks and devices. And while those are important, right, and many of us here, the folks on the government are in the middle of this, The challenge is that none of that investment is going to stop the next SolarWinds attack, right? SolarWinds attack was successful because it was creative and because the adversary, which was Russia SVR, was able to have that Trojan horse and then move laterally in their organizations by unauthorized command and control domain calls. And so that basically meant that they penetrated the perimeter and then were able to move laterally. We know that the XDR, EDR tools did not stop those either, those lateral movements, because those tools are only as good as the information that you give them, right? So, the modus operandi of those attackers, they're great tools, right? Don't get me wrong, for actually stopping the known threats. But in order to stop the unknown threats, you've got to be able to provide microsegmentation to the endpoint so that you can affect policy that only you want to be able to say that machine A or computer A talks to computer B, not to computer C.
Absolutely.
And if I can make one more comment, what we're seeing right now is that the attacks are going to have signatures of source code that's been stolen, right? So in SolarWinds, we had FireEye source code that was stolen, right? And then in the last 45 days, we had NVIDIA source code stolen. And we had, I think it was either Samsung or Android source code stolen as well. So what we're seeing is that these nation state attackers are going to inject malware into source code and actually dupe, users or even administrators thinking that they're upgrading their software when in fact they're loading a malware that could remain hidden for a long time. And the only way to stop that is by micro-segmenting the network there.
Very sophisticated attacks. Vu, you're on a journey over there. You're on a tear, just like at the other agencies. What are your top priorities right now that you're focusing on for the remainder of this year?
So thank you, Luke, for the questions.
Sure.
So zero trust still remains as our top priority or our key priority for the upcoming year. So even though we've been working on the implementation of zero trust with limited resources, we found that it's critical to prioritize the effort. So within zero trust itself, our priority remains, migrating our users to the department identity provider. Continue deploying and installing our endpoint detection and response agent throughout the department, because that's gonna help us on the response part when there is an incident. And then lastly is, start migrating user and application under our zero trust architecture in a phase approach, and fully implement zero trust capability at least to one information system.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you'll have it sort of end to end, if you will, a model that you can use to then start to roll the rest of that. And that's super impressive. I know it's been quite a journey for all of you. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architecture. We're just getting into priorities. John, I wanted to ask you, top priority for Palo Alto this year. What's the demand signal coming in from the community?
Yeah, sure thing, Luke. Well, for our public sector, our top priority is to continue to be a good strategic partner with our government clients. That means long-term commitment based on mutual trust and oriented towards common objectives. We think that as government organizations continue their digital and data transformation in the years to come, they're going to see more distributed applications, workloads, and data. And we think there's going to be a growing footprint of cloud native, distributed, and even non-traditional computing devices with IoT and remote work from home environments across their various network enterprises. Organizations are going to need to collaborate and share more data with federal and allied partners, and each organization's network perimeter is going to become harder to define and protect. So because we're talking about this strategic approach to cybersecurity, it can help secure an organization by eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating every stage of a digital interaction. We think this type of approach assumes cyber threats have compromised at least one or more portions of the attack process, though they may not have made it to the end of the attack process, which is what I would define as a successful attack.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of approach is going to broker resource-specific access through the least privileged approach that we talked about before by continuous authentication, authorization, and risk evaluation for every request. Securing government organizations' evolving data-centric future will be better achieved by adopting this kind of a data and resource-centric approach to security architecture. So we see this as an overall top priority for the coming year.
A lot of focus on it, and we really appreciate all that. Eric, how about at INA? Top priorities for you this year?
So probably the highest of my priorities for this year is increasing the level of automation, not just across, our SOAR infrastructure, but also across, how we do governance, risk, and compliance, how we do continuous monitoring, how we do, configuration management monitoring, an audit, and all of those things, and the integration of all of those, different pieces of data to create like a real-time understanding of risk across our enterprise. It's one thing to, lock everything down or to have good, incident response, but, it's better to have that ongoing understanding of where risks exist across your infrastructure so that you can do a better job at applying resources to address those risks as they happen, as opposed to, traditional kind of point in time understanding of your risk where, you make an investment and then you move on to another place and you don't really pay attention to what's happened, since then in that other environment where your risk could then be, changing, certainly changing, but, whether you should be concerned about it or not is something, you should know. But it'll also help us to then reprioritize resources that we have today doing more manual activities that aren't necessarily of great value, and putting those resources to work on the harder problems that we have, the real contextual problems, the things that computers aren't quite as good at as humans. So, that is probably my biggest priority, is to increase the level of automation, but to achieve zero trust, one of the things that we're also doing is, kind of rounding out and maturing our multi-factor authentication. Like Donna said, multi-factor authentication, it's either something you have, something you know, or something you are, right? So you can either do 2 of those or 3 of those. And in some cases, we are doing 3, right? Where, it's really necessary, where we've got folks that have access to systems of, most value with sensitive data. We're applying, a third factor there, but then also maturing that to the application level.
Sure. It's all about that risk, as you pointed out, Rob's pointed out, et cetera. Don, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask each one of the federal executives top lesson learned that you'd like to share with the community as you've been on this journey.
So yes, it has been a journey. One of the things that I did do back in the early part of February is I had a zero trust offsite with all of our partners, just to really level set all of the information that's needed, common lexicon, so that we're all speaking the same language. Because one of the things I realized is that we're all speaking different terminologies of what does that actually mean to the individual. And there was this perception that, initially zero trust was just at the perimeter. And then once we started talking about all the applications, then that started to, get everyone in the right motion. And so I would say one of the main things is, really having that communication, getting everything level set, and really define what the use cases are. As IT, we think we like to, know what the business needs are, but generally it's the business that's going to tell us what their needs are. And so really having that partnership with the business so that we could understand, the mission and the right tools and technologies to put in place, because we still have to enable the mission, even though, we're applying a secure way for them to still conduct their business.
Yeah, interesting. Baselining, just definition and nomenclature, very important.
Yeah.
Great catch. Vu, top lesson learned so far?
So there are several lessons learned to date with our zero trust initiative. So like what Donna said, stakeholder engagement, because we know that it is nearly impossible to implement or build a successful program without engaging our stakeholder to get their buy-in early. And then secondly is understanding the business case. Without clearly identifying the concept, the strategies, and the objective, you cannot really share your vision or communicate it to your stakeholder on what you want to implement, and or even know if you have successfully implemented the program. And then understanding your product, right? Because testing is the key here. Testing the zero trust product is very important to find out what breaks or what works in your environment. And then lastly is understanding your limitation, because we need to learn what and where the technical challenges are. So for example, like legacy application and system continue to be a challenge. So we need to, partner with our vendors to solution a workaround for these systems.
Words of wisdom from a master. Thank you, Vu. Rob, top lesson learned.
Yeah, Luke, I think you're seeing a trend here. It's messaging. The reality is there's going to be some changes coming with zero trust. Hey, Rob, why when I log in from my laptop and I'm using this browser, I'm being prompted to add another, pin in, use my password or pin again, or if I'm using my cell phone, it's kind of interesting. When I took away, when I mentioned we implemented our secure service edge capability. I mean, when I told someone you no longer have to have VPN, we're taking that away. It's like they lost their best friend. You can't do that. I'm so used to using the VPN. So, messaging is going to be key. This is why we're moving away from using the VPN, for example, and here's the value that you're going to receive from it. I mean, the reality was as soon as people got on and had our client to use the secure service edge, they were raving about it. They loved it. It was a positive change for them, but you got to get that message out. So a lot of changes coming with zero trust in the next 6 months, year and beyond, and we've got to be able to message it out to our teams.
Cleaner experience and higher security. What's not to love? That's awesome. Eric, top lesson learned as you've been on this journey.
Yeah, thanks. So we've learned a lot of the same lessons as everybody else, but I'll offer something a little different in that, I think for us, applying risk management techniques to your plan for zero trust, find where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck that you can achieve the fastest. And kind of start off there, right? You're not going to necessarily get to 100% compliance, across all pillars, across all networks. So you're going to have to decide, where is it worth spending the money? Is that last 10% of zero trust worth spending? When you might be taking it away from mission, you might be taking it away from, something else on another network that makes it more secure. So, applying risk management and making sure that, you're going after, that those programs and those capabilities are going to give you the biggest return on that investment in the shortest time possible.
Every federal executive has to deal with risk in some form or another, but boy, the CISOs more so than not every day. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. And I always like to wrap it up with this last question, which is tell us about what it's going to look like 2 years from now. Mark, we're going to start with you. Not so much in a petri dish, but, coming out of development, the demand signal that's coming in, what can we expect as we look around the environment 2 years?
Yeah, hi. I think that 2 years from now, and I've seen this with a number of federal folks when they're speaking at different conferences. In fact, I just came back from participating in a federal CIO roundtable earlier this week where I was in the audience. And the number one thing they were talking about, and this is echoing what Eric said just recently, was the fast. They want to get to zero trust fast, and they want to do it so that they can show progress. If we saw a lot of the, the executive order on cybersecurity, then the OMB memo, and even the National Defense Authorization Act, they're talking about having zero trust architecture and a way forward very quickly. For example, the DoD and the IC have to have by 9/30/23, which is about 16 months or a little less than that, a zero trust architecture and draft plan put forward. That's in law now. The OMB memo, they're talking about the civilian agencies get another year, so that by 9/30/24. It's still not a long time when we're talking about the federal government. So I think that what's going to happen in 2 years is that they're going to have something done quickly. and they're going to have to show results, right? There's a lot of Al shouts in there to the CISOs, and I feel your pain a little bit with having to implement these things in 60 days or these things in 90 days. But one of the things that I can say is that there's going to be less of a focus on zero trust, since it's becoming more of a marketing term, and more a focus on the actual components under those pillars of zero trust and what those mean. In our case at Illumio, and what we're seeing over the last 12 months is a focus on microsegmentation. And before you can do that, you've got to have that visibility on the back end of your network with the applications and the workloads.
All part of this architecture. I appreciate that. John, how about at Palo Alto Networks? What will you all be sort of in the process of implementing 2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah, sure, Luke. We've talked about a lot of the progress that's been made, but when I look to the future, I still see a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, we've seen there's still some hesitancy out there, even though this model, this architecture, this journey have all been proven to be effective at reducing and better managing risk. Implementing zero trust is a significant undertaking for any organization, especially the large and complex organizations. It requires planning, coordination of multiple service providers, and, as discussed many times so far in this program, change. The traditional security models and the concepts of all or nothing has left a lot of organizations hesitant to begin the journey. We think that starting the journey to zero trust maturity can be a lot less complicated than many believe. We think many organizations that already have some degree of relative maturity in their cybersecurity architecture means it has in place many of the underpinning foundations to make the journey doable. So our vision for the future is very positive, and we want to help organizations that haven't started that journey yet or are just getting started. We want to help them benefit from the lessons that we've learned along the way and help them more successfully navigate that journey.
Certainly is a daunting task. Felipe, how about at Fortinet? 2 to 3 years from now, what's the demand signal coming in? What are you all going to be focusing on at that point?
Well, certainly I'm encouraged on this belief from what I've heard from the CISOs that have joined this call here. I think zero trust architecture, certainly we adopted at least as a strategy, as a mindset, and implemented, right? And that gives 2 major principles to each agency and their employees. It's least privilege and assume breach. And those are very unifying principles that really drives everyone towards a single goal, a single outcome, which really then will then drive certain technology adoption, certain capability adoption, and make the nation as a whole better prepared for the kind of warfare that we're going to be facing in the future. I think we've seen what our adversaries are capable of. We know that they've really leveled up thanks to great innovations from great American companies in the past 20 years of delivering information and education globally. So with that, we must prepare ourselves. And I think zero trust architecture in 2-3 years, certainly adopted from a strategy perspective. And I think the core technologies will already be adopted at most agencies based on that.
Agencies well on their way. Eric, if I'm a freshly minted analyst at INA, am I going to get issued a high-side laptop I can sit in my kitchen and do my work? Or what's the deal in 3 years?
So that's a great question, actually. So there is a lot of attention right along that space, right, and allowing people to do more intelligence work at different levels and from different places. And so I think over the next couple of years we'll see a pretty significant increase in the ability to do remote work and have access to classified from remote locations.
Wow.
I don't know that it'll be at all levels, but
sure.
And certainly a lot of what we do could probably be done at the unclassified level.
Mm-hmm.
And so some IT agencies, including DHS, is trying to understand better, what is the real classification or sensitivity of this activity, and can we do that at the unclassified level? And if not, how do we enable them to do it at, say, the secret level, right? Maybe it doesn't need to be done at the TS level. So we're very much focused on that, and I expect to see a lot of progress in that area over the next couple of years.
Well, that sounds super exciting, and certainly the ZTA the architecture is going to enable a lot of that to happen. Rob, 3 years from now, you're going to have your identity management laid down. You're going to have some of these other pillars sort of put in place. I know it's never done, but what is it going to look like when you look around in 3 years in the ICE environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that Zero Trust is going to do for us, it's going to help us share data better, integrate systems with sister agencies, and get our mission, get our law enforcement officers the information and data they need to get their job done more efficiently and effectively. So I think Zero Trust is going to lay that groundwork and help us move forward from a mission perspective. I'm excited about it.
So are we, and we really appreciate everything you're doing. Vu, you and Donna both broad responsibilities there. You got DEA, the Marshal Service, FBI, ATF. What's it look like in a couple of years as you're implementing these different pieces and parts, and you're well on your way? Where do you expect to be, let's say, 2 to 3 years from now?
So, I expect more focus on cloud security to address, the continuing moving of on-prem systems to cloud. And we, as security vendor and federal agency, we need to work closely together as we identify the right capability to mature, because Zero Trust, as it provides an architecture to add security across all cloud environments. And then I also see, the department will adopt Zero Trust within the next couple of years. And embracing it for its benefits in contextual network access decisions and improving incident response. Because Zero Trust will allow us to, respond and contain incidents faster, as it will increase our capability to respond and detect any, abnormal activity or compromise at the endpoint level. And then lastly, I envision DOJ being in the position to share our lessons learned with other federal agencies, because it is our responsibility to collaborate with other agencies so that the federal government can work towards a Zero Trust environment.
And we really appreciate the leadership from DOJ and all the folks over there, you at the helm there, Vu. Donna, if I'm a freshly minted foreign service officer and I'm abroad, at my first embassy, what's my experience going to be 3 years from now?
I think your experience is going to be definitely different from what it is today. You're going to have, you're going to have a granular, tighter, I think, controls. As we implement the Zero Trust principles, right, we're implementing it from the standpoint that you're not trusting anyone. And so as Rob had mentioned earlier, they're going to see that continuous, vetting of making sure the identity of the individual on the network. And so there's going to be that culture change, that shift that's going to occur from that standpoint. And a lot of it is going to be communication and messaging. But one of the main things that they're going to see, but maybe not see on the back end, they'll see the end product of it is, we will have AI fully integrated along with behavioral analytics. That's one of the critical things that we need in our environment, because we're geographically dispersed. We're all over the world in all these different embassies and in some places, in hostile countries. And so we do need to have that behavioral analytics that gives us, the behavior patterns on the network, and also have integrated microsegmentation, especially on our high value assets that we currently have. We have a lot of rich data that we would have normalized by that time, that's going to be able to feed into AI and behavioral analytics.
Interesting balance there, where you've got to tighten it up and lock it down, but also unlock it to the right people at the right time. Listen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate thanking all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this program. Big missions, big jobs, super important. We really do appreciate it. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at the Federal News Network that make the program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.